G'day and welcome to another week of Talk of the Town. Warm greetings to the Port Adelaide Premiership champion, Warren Tredrea.
WWE superstar, Seb Costello, how are you?
Oh, well, that's quite a thing to throw back at me, and I wasn't prepared for that, but I am well. Thank you for acknowledging my undefeated pro wrestling career. The chief football reporter of the Nine Network is none other than Sammy McClure. G'day, Sam.
Hello, Seb. I wasn't going to go there, but now that Tredders did, I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, dear. Well, that makes one of us. Let's move on to our first topic because it's one Tredders that will be big in South Australia. A guy you probably know quite well and certainly played against in Andrew McLeod has gone on the Bungie and Brettster podcast, which he hosts with NBL legend Brett Maher, and talked about how he feels the Adelaide Football Club is a place where you don't feel welcomed as a past player. Well, that's certainly how he felt. Are you able to offer us any insight as to why you might feel that way? And is that a big talking point at the moment?
Oh, is it a big talking point? It was the lead story in sport last night, so we're a bit thin on the ground here. Players have returned to competitive training, but when a former champion, and I think, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to Mark Rashuda, I think he is the best player to play for the Crows. 340 games. We know he won the 2 premierships with his teammates, but best on ground in both grand finals, 3 best and fairest, superstar, arguably the best Indigenous player we've seen in our game. He's come out and spoken, and Bungie doesn't speak much publicly. I used to work with him in radio here in Adelaide many moons ago when we were both playing, so we're good mates. But the situation here for me, and there's a lot of people who have jumped to the club's defence, which happens in Adelaide. The ambassadors get rolled out, but simply there's a hesitation there. That happens naturally with a lot of players that retire because you go from being in the inner sanctum to all of a sudden not part of the inner sanctum, and you feel a bit awkward going in only because you don't want to tread in an area that you're no longer part of. Sure, you go back to club functions, you support the club as much as you can, and still love your footy club, but it's not always comfortable coming back inside. But for me, for him to say this in a public forum would suggest there's a little bit of uncertainty there. He runs an Indigenous program. He contracts to the club. So community-based work. He's involved in AFLW. But for me, it just sits there and says all is not 100%. And he's speaking honestly. He doesn't feel quite welcome in the footy club, even though they open up their arms to him. But he just feels a little awkward. And is that bad?
I think we saw Graham Corns, one of the people you're talking about there, Tredders, who said, this is a common feeling amongst ex-players because they've gone from being such a central part of the organisation having to move on to the current players. But Sam, when you're talking Andrew McLeod not feeling welcome at Adelaide, that's a big story.
Yeah, I think it is. And look, I think it was Mark Rashudo, it might have been Rob Chapman, Tredders, you can pick me up on this, who said in the last 24 hours that this is the last thing the club needs at the moment. And I can absolutely understand that. It's terrible timing for the Crows who must be said, have been through a fair bit. But I would say that if anyone of McLeod's ilk from another club had said similar things, they would be greeted with, the same amount of curiosity, I guess, by the media, but also by the fans. If Matthew Pavlich said that about Fremantle, if Bob Murphy said that about the Western Bulldogs, if Chris Judd wasn't director of footy at Carlton and said that about the Blues, I mean, these are the ilk of the players we're talking about. And as Tredders said, if he's not the best, he's in the conversation for one of the 2 best players ever to put on an Adelaide jumper. So I found it a little strange. Although Tredders, it has been, validating, I guess, for a lot of people in Adelaide. And Jerry Healy was saying this with me on radio recently, that it's not a fait accompli that when you leave a club, you just automatically feel comfortable walking back in. So there are factors which could explain it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of those factors many moons ago was we know that Tyson Edwards and he were best mates. That fell apart. Andrew spoke publicly about how he's looking to join Essendon at one stage, and it wasn't until Bill Sanders, who I think was president at the time or CEO, stepped in and said, hey, do you want to leave your legacy being a superstar Adelaide player to play your last few years at another club? So I'm not sure. I'm privy to a bit of the feeling, but it's a reality. Sometimes, as you say, it doesn't end perfectly. I've numerous players who I've played with take a couple of years to come back to the fold of the club. And once you do see the same faces and welcome the same, it is the same teammates. It is the same people you've spent time with. You might have issues with people from above. And this just says to me from Andrew sees the love for his club and the direction of where his club's been and probably sat back and has been absolutely silent in probably the last 2 years of Adelaide's footy's hemorrhaging off the field in terms of a cultural perspective. he's probably sat back and just thought it just doesn't sit right. And there's probably things he thinks they could do better. And I know for a fact that the club has already, they've said publicly, they've reached out to him to go, one, why are you saying this? And two, let us understand more. And if they're a smart football club, which you hope they are, and everything would suggest that they're trying to move forward and the decisions they made last year, they bring him into the fold and say, give us what your thoughts, and actually listen to his thoughts and go, there might actually be some merit to this.
Treaders, I want to ask this another one before we move on. But Sam, you were heavily involved in the story around the Adelaide Crows camp. It was a totally legitimate story, and if anybody questions that, just look at how the football club's been going since then. Treaders, one of the undercurrents of the reporting around that famous camp was particularly the Indigenous players at Adelaide felt uncomfortable with what was done. Could that be part of this feeling that Andrew McLeod feels?
It could be. But I know that Andrew is not super close in that situation. I know he's involved in the AFLW program, and the program he runs in the schools, very much like Port Adelaide's Power Community Youth program, is a full-time beast. You know what I mean? And when I say that, it gets to regional areas of South Australia, schools. And so he's probably a little bit, whilst he's aligned to the footy club from a contractual point of view in providing a program, he's not there day to day. So he probably only looks on from a perspective of a former fan and a bloke who loves his club.
Yep.
And he's just had an honest comment with one of his best mates in Brett Maher in this forum, even though it has gone public. Did he expect it to go so big? No, but there's probably a bit of truth to every situation, like anything. And if you look back to those situations in the last few years, the only things that haven't changed at the football club are the key directors on the board, the CEO, who is still part of it, and the president or the chairman, who is still part of it. Yet Pike, Camporelli and Burton are the ones that lost their job. So maybe I don't know, but I'm maybe from above this. His issue is not actually with the on-field stuff. It's the way the club's being led or directed.
Sammy, before we go, greatest Crow of all time, Mark Rasciuto or Andrew McLeod?
Yeah, geez, it's you'd like to have the second pick. No, I'm still Rasciuto. I think purely to watch as a spectacle, McLeod in sort of 96 to 99 was for me one of my favourite players to watch in the competition. He was just so silky. There was no one else like him. But Rasciuto, for everything that he could do inside and out, both sides of the body, he was so brutally tough. And he was a beacon of hope, I think, in many ways for that club. And he was the face of the club. And by the way, continues to be the face of the club. But no, all things aside, I think if they're both up against the wall, I had to pick one in their prime. I'm picking Rasciuto.
And I think we heard McLeod for Treaders. So let's move on to our next topic, which regards Tasmania, and it also regards the money that's available to football clubs. We keep hearing people who are quite serious when they say we may lose football clubs through this financial crisis. And one of these issues revolves around Tasmania. Tasmanian government puts up roughly $8 million to Hawthorn and North Melbourne to stage games in Tassie. But the Tassie government, the Premier Peter Gutwein, has said that they won't be paying if the games aren't played this year, and they won't be accepting games if they have to be played without crowds. Sam, particularly probably for more North Melbourne than Hawthorn, this is a serious financial issue.
Yeah, it is. And I just think it leaves a bit of taste in the mouth of probably both parties. It feels like we're negotiating in bad faith a little bit. I mean, everyone's been affected so heavily financially, and you can understand Peter Gutwein's point of view. But let's not forget, this is the same state that has been pushing for their own team for the best part of half a century now. And I think Tasmania absolutely should have their own team. I think not many people are of the opposing view now. But in order to do that, and yeah, look, the Tasmanian team's been pushed back by COVID-19. There's no doubt about that. Wouldn't we still like to see footy in Tasmania? Granted, behind closed doors isn't ideal, but it's not ideal for anyone at the moment. Now, I'm not saying that Peter Gutwein's government should have to fork out the money that was promised to both North Melbourne and Hawthorn, but if both those clubs are willing to still go down there, and hopefully Travis Old and the AFL can send down pretty big opponents that will draw big eyeballs on television screens, a la Collingwood or Essendon or potentially even Richmond. I don't think it's a bad thing, Seb and Treaders, to continue to remind people that great state should have its own football team. And by doing that, you want to put on good games with big teams.
Treaders, they're not barracking for a club to fall over, so a Tasmanian side slips nicely into the group of 18.
I don't think it'll happen anyway. We've got TV rights that suggest that it has to go in, I think, in the current format. I might be wrong on that it has to have a certain amount of teams. But I can understand the Premier wanting to do this. He's got bigger fish to fry with COVID-19. He's obviously got unemployment issues. He's got funding issues. He's also probably got a big black hole like every business that has, bar a couple who are doing well in this situation. I can understand. The only reason I say that, I liken it to the South Australian government here, who have paid for State of Origin rugby league game 1 to be played in Adelaide, significant money to be paid. Their attitude is, we want it for tourism and we want it for our people who live in our state to go and experience something and go and create an economic effect and bring something that would not normally be there. That's exactly why Tasmania does AFL Football 1. Yeah, they want exposure to the big game. They want their people who live there to be able to go and experience it. And they're doing it and they're paying for a right for those games. What I would say from a broadcaster's point of view, I'd rather see it played in Launceston. I'd rather see it played at Port Melbourne Oval than an empty MCG. I think an empty smaller stadium looks a hell of a lot better than an empty massive stadium. I think there might be some merit in that.
It's funny you mention that, Tredders. I'm reminded of sitting in an airport lounge in Europe somewhere, and the World Volleyball Championships were being broadcast from Rod Laver Arena. And there was this enormous Melbourne on the court. And I just thought to myself, nobody in Melbourne probably knows this is on, but our city is being promoted around the world. And I reckon the Tasmanian government might want to consider the value of having their city on television, even if there aren't crowds.
Yeah, I'm with you, Seb.
Yeah. A couple of things to burn through before we get to the end of the show. There's going to be the first ever 2-time member of the social club. But let's focus on the hubs right now, because there's been a bit of a discussion. Caroline Wilson reported on Footy Classified last night that the players have put a list of demands to the AFL. Some of them would like to be able to cook in their hotel rooms in Queensland and would like to have a toasted sandwich maker, a blender, a couple of other things. Tredders, you're our ex-player on this panel. If you were in their position, told to base yourself in a hub away from your home and away from your club, what would you be asking for?
I'd ask for a sauna, I'd ask for a massage parlour, I'd ask for an in-room cinema, I'd ask for a massage chair from my room, I'd ask for a spa. No, I'm joking. I just want a coffee machine. And I reckon every player, I've seen the amount of coffees that go into a football club. I reckon out of the 40, at least 30 players would have a coffee in the morning. Don't worry, the coaches are coffee addicts too. I think a full-time barista would be something silly, and the AFL should use it from a commercial aspect. Buy a coffee rights, get a sponsor for the coffee rights, and they'll get more coverage in that month in Queensland than anyone in the coffee.
So we need a full-time barista at the hubs, Tredders.
Absolutely, and I'll tell you what, there'd be a lineup for coffees. It'd be like going to Woolworths or Coles where you get that tag for 300 grams of Virginian ham.
What do you think, Sammy?
You don't need your own barista. You just need a good quality coffee machine and a 5-minute YouTube tutorial. If I can do it, anyone can do it. And I am a coffee addict, and I haven't paid for a coffee in a long, long time. You go and buy good beans, you get yourself a good machine, and you froth the milk perfectly. It's as good as the real thing. It might give you something to do with their downtime worry. I
agree, but I've watched your Instagram, and the things you say are beautiful are not looking very good. You've got a lot of practice to do.
You've got to look beneath the surface, Warren. Beauty is not just skin deep.
Sure.
Oh, this is going in a different direction. Yeah. I think, look, but Sam, before we leave this topic, I'd be the first one to say when the players are out of step with community sentiment, and there was probably a period where people were looking at the Players Association, resisting pay cuts at the same time people were losing their jobs, at the same time the footy industry was standing down, a lot of full-time workers. It's not really that precious, is it, to ask for a toasted sandwich maker? I mean, that's fair enough, isn't it?
I would have thought if you're in a bunker for a month, I don't know, are you allowed to go surfing? You're allowed to play golf? It changes all the time. And you're away from home. I think you're entitled to a couple of the feature, what do you say, the creature comforts that you've got in your own home. Yeah, it doesn't mean you bring your own DeLonghi machine. Well, your little pod machine, yeah, fine. If you bring your PlayStation, yeah, fine. But I think one thing they'll desperately need is Wi-Fi and pretty good service on it too.
Guys, I'll move on because time for something a little bit different to that. And that, of course, is the Social Club. And for the first time, we are inducting a 2-time member into the Social Club. It is Patrick Dangerfield, whose social media has caught our eye this week, especially for his choice of entrance music. What do you make of that, Sammy?
He's always good for a laugh. He's Paddy Dangerfield, and I think when you're as good as he is, as Tredders knew as a player, you could get away with a little bit more, like Tredders did with some of his goal celebrations. No,
hey.
No. It's look. I think Paddy does a really good job of promoting the sport, of not taking himself too seriously. There are always going to be his critics for one reason or another. You can't please everyone, but no, I thought it was funny. Big out of me.
I reckon we need a bit more entrance music around. Maybe if we could each think of some entrance music for one of us. So, for example, Tredders, I know a lot of our female viewers who, especially when you put on the collar and the suit jacket, the old ZZ Top classic, "Every Girl Crazy About a Sharp-Dressed Man," might actually apply to Warren Tredrea. I think that would be just the entrance music for you.
Well, I won't show you that I'm wearing shorts and running shoes at the moment, so I won't disappoint you. It's good up top, but it's pretty bad below.
Tredders, you got some entrance music for Sammy, maybe?
Well, maybe not the music, but the look-alike.
Yep.
Ronan Keating,
Yep.
I thought, was his twin that had been mismatched and sent overseas at a young age.
Right, okay. What songs has Ronan got?
Oh, what do they say? If you say nothing, something about you say nothing at all, which a lot of footy fans would probably hope he actually did at some stage.
Oh, no, you say it best when you say nothing at all. Fair enough.
Oh, I just like the last bit of that, say nothing at all.
Yep, okay. I won't ask if you've got any entrance music for me, Sam, because I can't imagine.
No, I do, Seb, because it's more than a song for just you. But before we get to that, how Tredders didn't get the song from Lady Gaga and Beyonce of Telephone.
Because I wasn't brave enough to go there, that's why.
Yeah, well, come on, Seb. I'm not going to music for you. I'm going...
Okay. All right.
Seb, I need to know. I've already been accused this week of not asking the hard question. What on earth is that?
That was me wearing a spandex outfit that was far too tight around the hindquarters. And I apologise.
No, I'll interrupt. You're just dribbling now. You're our fearless leader. You roll that crap out again, you lose your job.
Oh, Mr. Tredrea, I apologize. You know what? I actually at the time was very proud of that. And you know what? I'm going to own it. I still am proud of it. Hey, I'll take you in the ring anytime, Tredrea.
All right. Just wait till those borders collapse and I'll be over there soon. I'm not doing quarantine when I come home.
I'll ref that. I'm happy to ref.
Okay. Oh, good. Oh, I'm glad. Hey, Seb, before we go, I did read a little bit of discussion between you and Eddie McGuire on Footy Classified. Had the whole footy world talking. A few people are asking, where you're going to be a part of Footy on 9 going forward. Are we going to see you tonight on Footy Classified?
No, absolutely, Seb. It was a tweet that was all ingested, sort of Eddie saying, if you don't ask the hard questions, then don't come Monday, sort of stuff. The last thing I'll say on all of this, because I think it has been lost a little bit, and plenty of people having their opinion about it. But there seems to be this view that if I didn't, and I wasn't even there, by the way, I was 100 kilometres away in Melbourne, if I didn't ask Jack Stephen the hard question, then I wasn't doing my job. It's a fairly significant assumption in that statement that I didn't actually know what had happened, or that I hadn't spoken to Jack or spoken to people close to the situation and the investigation. So I'm really comfortable with the work that I did. And the other thing I'd say to it is that, I've heard some people throughout the week say you shouldn't pick and choose. Journalism is all picking and choosing. If we wrote and reported everything that we knew, we would have very few friends. You have to ask yourself the question, is this of value to the public? And if the answer to that is yes, then is the punishment worth the fit of the crime? Is the juice worth the squeeze? You have to ask all of those questions as a journalist when you get information.
We're glad he... No, mate, and that's a very worthy statement. But Tredrea, we're glad he hasn't quit, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially for someone who doesn't have too many friends. And I assume for you two to do this show with me, you don't have too many friends. So it's good to know at least we've got each other. No, you finished it on a real positive. We were having fun and it got all serious pants on us.
It did. Oh, dear. Well, no, gentlemen, let's do it.
I quit.
Next week, maybe.
But I'll be back next week.
The Port Adelaide
Done.
Championship
See you next Wednesday.
Thank you, Warren Tredrea. Thank you, Seb McClure. This has been Talk of the Town.